Let's say this is you and you're trying to go to your friend's house, which is a few kilometers down the street. So here is your friend. So you need to walk a path to your friend's house. Right. The path you're going to walk is depending on two parameters. First, the direction, and the second is the distance. The distance is how far you are from your current position to your friend's house. So here's the distance. And you can also have the direction. Am I moving to the left? Am I moving to the right? Am I moving just in between? Now, what is going to determine that is what we refer to as the cardinal point. The cardinal point. So which means as you are standing, you can move towards the north, you can move towards the south, you can move towards the west, or you can move towards the east. So if you're walking this path, you're moving towards a particular direction, which you're going to get to in a bit. After getting to your friend's house, you guys probably decide to go chill out again under a tree. So let's say this is the path that leads to where you have the tree. See, here is a tree. Right. So as you left your friend's house, both of you decide to go and rest under a tree. Now you have a new direction, and then you probably have a new distance you're going to cover. So you have another distance. Right. So you have a direction. So here's the direction. North, south, the west, and the east. After doing all of that, after resting under the tree, you've gisted, and then you have to go back home to where you were coming from. So which means if you have to go back home, you probably have to walk this path back home. Back to your house. Okay. So everything we are doing in bearing and distances, which we're going to be covering in this video, has to do with stuffs like this. Okay. How do I work with distance? How do I work with directions? Now, by definition, bearing is the direction you travel between 2 points, but is usually measured as an angle in degrees. So which means that if you have to move from where you are to somewhere else, maybe to where your car is parking, then you have to move at a particular angle. This angle is usually read from the north. So at a particular angle, it could be 60 degrees, it could be 45 degrees, it could be any angle. Just to make sure you have a direction to get you to the car. Now, bearing are of two types, which I'm going to be covering in this video. We have the compass bearing, and we have the three-figure bearing. Before I define the compass bearing, I would love to re-emphasize that for you to move in any direction, we have what we call the 4 cardinal points. So here at the top is the north, this is the east, down here, down south, and here is the west. Now, you can move in any direction you want. If you wish to walk towards the north, then you are taking this path all the way up. If you wish to walk directly east, then you are moving towards this direction, west and south. Now, you might decide to walk in between. That is between north and east, you have a northeast. Between south and east, you have southeast. Between south and west, southwest. And between north and west, you have northwest. Now, it is not possible for us to talk about these things without mentioning the angles. Remember that I said bearing has to do with directions and an angle and all of that, right? So which means between the north and the east, you have a turn of 90 degrees. Between south and east, you have another angular turn of 90 degrees. Between south and west, you have an angular turn of 90 degrees. And between north and west, you have an angular turn of 90 degrees. Knowing this, if you decide to walk directly in between north and east, directly in between, I emphasize that directly in between. So if you're walking directly in between, the 90 degrees you have here must have been divided into two equal parts since it is directly in between. And now the 90 that you used to have here becomes 45 degrees and 45 degrees. When you do the same with this, you have 45 degrees and 45 degrees. And by the time you sum up everything you have, you must have a 360 degrees. Remember that we used to have 90 right here. So 90 between the north and the east, 90 between the south and the east, 90 between the south and the west, and 90 between the north and the west. Everything together gives a 360 degrees. And the same thing goes with what you are going to obtain when it is divided into 45, 45, or 45 degrees. Now back to compass bearing. Compass bearing basically is a system of bearing which angles are measured from the north or the south, depending on which is closer. So angles measurement, usually from the north or south, depending on which is closer. So which means if you are moving north 50 degrees to the east, it means you are moving from the north to the direction of the east, but you've just moved 50 degrees. So which means we can represent that this way. Here's the north, we have the south, we have the west, then we have the east. So 50 degrees northeast is going to go this way. That is counting from the north, because if you look at the east and the north being mentioned, you're going to see that it is directly in between north and in the east. So here we have a 50 degrees angle, and that is 50 degree northeast. Notice that the line of bearing and the line pointing to the north is where we have the angle, which means if you decide to put your angle here, we cannot read these as not 40 degrees east. That is, the angle we are referencing, this 50 degrees to the east, has to be the angle you made from this line with the north-south line. Let's look at another one. Let's say you're trying to represent south 33 degrees west. You have your four cardinal points. Here's the north, this is the south, this is the west, and this is the east. So south 33 degree west means between the south and the west. So the angle has to be made with the south. So this is 33 degrees. So if I ask you, what is north 10 degrees west? You're going to have something like this. So this is the north, this is the south, this is the west, and this is the east. So 10 degrees west is going to be something like this. So you're going to have an angle of 10 degrees. So the angle essentially has to be made with the north-south line for compass bearing. Now, you would notice something in all of the instances that we've cited, the examples that we've taken under compass bearing. You will notice that all of the angles have not gone beyond 90 degrees. The reason is because if you look at the north and the west, remember in the introductory part, I said the whole of the angle you can have between the east and the north is 90, between the east and the south is 90, between the south and the west is 90, and between the north and the west is 90. So which means if you're taking any angle, compass bearing, if you're taking any angle from here, all right, but it's still within the south and the west, it means any angle that you're going to be given cannot go beyond 90 degrees. And that's why sometimes you find some text referring to compass bearing as acute angle bearing. That is that about compass bearing. Let's talk about 3-digit bearing. 3-digit bearing, unlike compass bearing, is forced. It uses three digits to represent the numbers, the bearing. Okay, and the readings are usually taken from the north. This is basically from the north, unlike the compass bearing that can move from the north, or you can take it from the south, depending on what the angle is reading. Okay, so for 3-figure bearing, even if you want to write a 2-digit number or a single-digit number, for instance, you have 1 degrees. 1 degrees in 3-figure bearing is 001 degrees. 10 degrees is going to be 010 degrees. So it has to be like this for us to know that, oh, you're actually talking about a number on that 3-figure bearing. Now that being said, I said earlier on that 3-figure bearing has to do with reading being made from the north. So this is the north, and everything you are going to be doing has to start from the north in the clockwise direction. Clockwise direction. Now, this is 0 degrees. This is going to be 90 degrees because as you move from the north to this direction, which is the east, you have a 90 degrees. As you move from the east to the south, you have an extra 90 coming on this 90 degrees. So if we add that together, you have 180 degrees. When you do the same here, you have 270 degrees. And when you continue, you're going to have a 360 degrees. Essentially, your north carries both 60 degrees and 0 degrees. That is the start and the finish. Now, if you want to make a reading of 1 degrees, 1 degree is between 0 and 90 degrees, and so it's just going to be, very small, 1 degrees. And if someone says, okay, represents 120 degrees, on a 3-figure bearing or 3-digit bearing, it's going to look like this. So if you look at it, it has to cross the 90 line, but here is 180. So it has to cross the 90 line. As we can see, that 120 degrees is between 90 and 180 degrees. So you can just put it somewhere here. But remember that your reading is from the north in a clockwise manner. So the whole of the 120 we are talking about starts from the north and stops here. Now, the question says you should represent 240 degrees in three figure. So this is the north again. You start your reading. Remember that this is 0, 90, 180, and this is 270. So your 240 goes like this, right in between 180 and 270 degrees. So here we have a 240 degrees. So this is how readings are made with three figure bearing as compared to compass bearing. It's time to perform some readings. We are to give the compass bearing reading on what we have on the left hand side and three figure on the right hand side. So give the compass bearing reading of the following. Remember that compass bearing has to do with reading from the north or the south depending on which is closer. So if you look at the angle we have in the first question, we have a 20-degree angle. So that is closer to the south. Now we can supply the other information. This is the east and this is the west. So here you can see that the 20 degrees is in line with the north-south line, what have you. And so this is going to be south 20 degrees to the east. The second one, we have the north, the south, the west, and the east. Again, the bearing, which is the line, and the angle we have here is still with the north-south axis. So which means this is going to be north, because it's between the north and the east. We have a 46 degrees angle. Now, in the C part, which is the third question, we have the west, we have the east, and we have the south. So here we can say that the 70 degrees is the angle made with the west-east line, but our angle has to be made with the north-south line. So we have to find out what the angle here is going to be. Remember that the whole of the angle you have between the south and the west, the whole of the angle here is 90 degrees. So to find the little angle here, we have to subtract 70 degrees from 90 degrees. So which means if I call this theta, because that is the angle we need actually, right? So we have theta equals 90 degrees minus 70 degrees. That is equal to 20 degrees. And now this is 20. You can now write your compass bearing as south 20 degrees west. In the D part of this question, the same thing is happening. You would see that the angle 30 degrees is being made with the west-east line, and it has to be the north-south line. So we need the angle that is here. So let me call this alpha. So to find alpha, what do we do? Remember that the whole of north and west carries a total angle of 90 degrees. So which means alpha is going to be equal to 90 degrees minus 30 degrees. And this is equal to 60 degrees. This 60 is now what we are going to use to name our compass bearing. So this is 60 degrees. So this is going to be north, 60 degrees west. That is how it works. No big deal. Let's go to three-figure bearing. Remember that three figure has to do with 3 digits. You just have to provide the 3 digits, even if you have 2 numbers or you have just a figure, right? So give the 3-figure bearing of the following. So let's begin. Remember that our reading is always from the north, and 3-figure bearing doesn't really care if it's to the south or no. It's the 3 digits is going to handle all of that, whether it's the south or the east or the southeast or all of that. The fact that it is 3-figure means it is counting from 0 to 360. So every direction has been covered. So counting from the north, we have to stop immediately we touch the line. So we are stopping. So which means we have a total angle of 40 degrees. So that is going to be written as 0, 4, 0 degrees. That is quite easy, right? Okay, let's move on to the B part. Again, our reading has to start from the north. So we keep moving until we touch the line. Now we have to break this down because now it has crossed the first portion, the first region, which is the east. I'm not supposed to put that, but it has crossed this portion where you have a 90 degrees total angle, and it has moved on from there to the other part, right? Now we just have to divide that into two parts. So the upper part here is 90 degrees, as we can see, and now we have an extra part on this 90, which is 20. So which means the three figure bearing here is going to be 90 degrees plus 20 degrees, and this is equal to 110 degrees. This is 3 digits already. You have nothing to worry about. The C part again, we have to keep moving all the way from here. Remember that as soon as we touch the line, we stop. So this reading consists of 3 major angles. This is angle number 1. This is 1. And this is the second angle. This is angle 2. And we have another angle right here, which is angle 3. The whole of angle 1 is 90 degrees. The whole of angle 2 is 90 degrees. But angle 3 is unknown. So we have to find that. So how do we find that? We're going to use the 50 that we have on this side to calculate the remaining angle for that we marked as 3. Right. So let me mark that as gamma this time around. So how do we find gamma? So gamma can be found by subtracting 50 from 90 degrees. And that's going to be 40 degrees. Remember where we are coming from. Our reading should be 90, the first 90, plus the second 90, plus whatsoever we obtain as gamma. So that would be 90 degrees plus 90 degrees plus 40 degrees. You cannot use this angle. That's why we calculated this. So this is going to be 180 plus 40 degrees. This is 220 degrees. Now, let's apply the same idea to this. Let's read. This is the north. So let's read from the north. How many angles do we have? 4 angles. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so let's calculate them. Angle 1 is 90 degrees. Angle 2 is 90 degrees. Angle 3 is 90 degrees. Angle 3, angle 2, angle 1. They are all 90 degrees. So we need the angle that is here. Okay, so let me call this lambda. All right. So for this, to find lambda, it's going to be equal to 90 degrees minus 15 degrees, which is equal to 75 degrees. So to find the three figure bearing of this, we have to add up all the 90s that we have along the way. That is 90 degrees plus 90 degrees plus 90 degrees plus whatsoever you obtain as lambda. So you have up to 70 degrees plus 75 degrees. I think this should be 345 degrees. It is possible to convert from compass bearing to three figure and vice versa. So let's say you have a couple of compass bearing that you wish to convert to three figures. So let's take the first one. Let's say you're trying to convert north 50 degrees east to three figures. So first we have to represent the information we have on the 4 cardinal points. So north 50 degrees east, this is north, and this is the east, right? So it's going to be here. And the angle is going to be with the north. 50 degrees. So the three-figure reading is going to be reading from the north. Remember, you have to start reading from the north until it touches the line that talks about the bearing. So that's 50 degrees. So if I'm going to write that down, this is going to be 0, 5, 0 degrees. What if the question says you should convert south 30 degrees west to three figures? What do you do? Again, first, locate where south 30 degrees west is going to be. So if you have a very small knot, this is south, this is west, and this is east, we can both agree that it is going to be here. And it's going to be 30. So our three figure is going to be making our reading from the north again until it touches that line, this line right here. Again, we break it down as we've seen before. So here we have a 90 degrees. Here we have a 90 degrees. And this small part, that's 30 degrees. As we can see, 30 degrees. So what do? We add it together. So which means south 30 degrees west is going to be 90 degrees plus 90 degrees plus 30 degrees. This is going to be 210 degrees. North 15 degrees west. Let's do that. This is north and this is west. So the angle in question is going to be somewhere here. So we have a 15 degrees. To convert to three figure, we have to move all the way from the north because this is three figure. And we're going to stop as soon as we touch that line. Let's break it down again. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first one is 90. The second is 90. The third is 90. The fourth is the angle that is here, which I call theta. That is right above this line. Okay. So how do we calculate that? Since we know that the whole of the north and the west is 90 degrees, that is, the whole of the angle here is 90 degrees. So you just subtract 15 from 90 degrees, and then you have theta. So which means the theta is going to be 90 degrees minus 15 degrees. And that's 75 degrees. So which means this missing part here is 75. So which means that north 15 degrees west is going to be equal to 90 plus 90 degrees plus 90 degrees plus 75 degrees. That is 270 plus 75 degrees. That's 345 degrees. Now, with all the instances that I have given, you should be able to tell us what would be the bearing of this. If you have it here, and you have your angle right here, let's call this 20. So this is south 20 degrees east. You can tell what that would be. You pick your reading from the north. As soon as you touch the line, you stop. You break down all the angles you have along the way. The first angle is 90. This remaining angle here is going to be 90 degrees minus 20. That is 70. So which means the bearing in question, which is south 20 degrees east, is going to be 90 degrees plus 70 degrees, and that's equal to 160 degrees. This is how to convert from compass bearing to three figures. All you just have to do is make your reading properly, break down the angles along the way, the ones that you can easily figure out that are existing, like all of the 90s that we've come across, note them down, and the missing angle can also be calculated. So let's say that you have it this way. Someone says this is a knot, and someone decides to put the angle here. Just no compass bearing, nothing. The person just decide to put an angle here. So no hassle, just add the 90 and the 10 together. So this is going to be 100 degrees. Three figures. We have previously mentioned that it is possible for us to convert from compass bearing to three figures. It is also possible to convert from three figures to compass bearing. So I'm going to use these 4 questions to illustrate that. So first is 20 degrees. So we do 20 degrees. So since our reading starts from the knot for three figure, then we read until we stop. This is going to be 20 degrees actually. So 20 degrees. So we need this because we are trying to convert from three figure to compass. Now, every criteria has been met for writing a compass bearing. First, the angle being made is between the line, which is the line for the bearing, and the north-south axis. So the 20 is fine. And we can also see that the 20 degrees is an acute angle. So all we just have to do is to put the north and the east. So this is not 20 degrees east. For 150, however, it is going to be different. Let's see. So reading from the north, everything here closed at 90. So before we can get 150, we have to enter this portion. Remember that this stops at 180. So 150 stays here. So this is 150 degrees. Now, this is a compass bearing that we are trying to convert to. So we need this place, which is the south, and we need to find the angle here. Remember that the angle you are going to be putting down has to be made with the north-south line. So how do we get the remaining angle here? So let's call this angle x. So how do we find x? So we subtract 150 from 180. Why? Because the total angle here is 180 and we need a small portion here. So if we cut the upper part off, if we cut this portion off, then we get the remaining part we are looking for. So the whole angle is 180, okay, and the portion we are trying to cut off is 150, so we can get the remaining part here. So which means that x is going to be equal to 180 degrees minus 150 degrees. That is 30 degrees. So we have a 30 degrees here. Remember that this part is the east. So which means that the compass bearing for 150 degrees, three figure, is going to be south 30 degrees to the east. Do not make the mistake of using the angle that we have at this point. Let's check for C. 250 degrees, 3 digits. So starting from the north, everything here ends at 90, everything here ends at 180, so we are still above 180, but everything in this quadrant ends at 270, so let me just stop here. And that marks 250. Remember, this is 270. Okay. So let's put the cardinal points south, west, and the east. So which means that for this reading, we need the angle here, since our compass bearing only takes the angle that it makes with the north-south line for its reading. So clearly we know that it is between the south and the west. So we just need the angle in between. Now the whole of the angle here is 250 degrees. So which means to get the angle here, you just have to be calculative enough, right? So how do we get the remaining angle here? Since we know that from this part here to this part is 180, if you are following, this is 180 degrees. But we pushed further into the zone to get us 250. So we need to get the angle here. So the angle here is just, okay, this is 250, right? I left 180 here, and this is 250. So how much have I added to get me the 250 degrees? So how do I do that? I just subtract the 180 from 250. Remember that if I clear this off, I'm going to be having, if we clear this off, okay, so we're going to be having the remaining portion here. So we just subtract. So alpha is going to be equal to 250 minus 180 degrees. Alpha equals to 70 degrees. So the angle here is going to be 70. And so we have south 70 degrees west. I want to believe by now you should be able to do for 300 degrees. Okay. North. So the 300 equivalence is going to be here. Yeah. Because that's basically the where you have it. This is 270 and this is 360. So it's just in between. So this is the north, this is the south, this is the west, and this is the east. 300 degrees, everything here. But remember that we cannot use this angle for compass bearing. We need this angle.
It's 11 hours.
I beg your pardon. So to get the angle here, how do we do that? The same process that we used for this, for the 250, is what we're going to be using for this. Right? Now, here, to find the remaining angle here, we know that the whole of the angle that we have is 360. From here all the way down here is 300, but we need the angle here. So if we know the total, all we just have to do is to remove the part, okay, that we have already to get the remaining part. So how do we do that? We just subtract. That's going to be 360. That is the total angle minus 300 degrees. This is 60 degrees. So here is 60 degrees. So which means the compass bearing equivalence is going to be north, 60 degrees west.